The scream died in Clara Ashford's throat before it could wake her. Her body thrashed against sweat-soaked sheets, tangled in fabric that felt like burial shrouds. In the nightmare, skeletal hands dragged her down through cold earth, while a voice, ancient and hungry, whispered her name. Clara. Clara. Each repetition pulled her deeper into darkness that had weight and texture, pressing against her mouth and nose until she couldn't breathe. She was 24 years old and dying in her sleep. Her lips moved, forming words she would never remember. Please, someone. The plea escaped as barely a whisper in her Cambridge bedroom. Yet 43 miles away in London, a man who was not quite a man stopped mid-stride on a rain-slicked street. Lord Lucian Blackthorne had not heard a psychic cry in 2 centuries. He stood motionless beneath a gas lamp, his silver eyes narrowing as the impossible sound echoed through his consciousness. A woman's voice, desperate and fading. The words themselves didn't matter. It was the need behind them that pierced through the supernatural barriers he'd built around his mind. Someone was calling for help across an impossible distance. His hand tightened on the ebony walking stick he carried. The rain fell around him, but never touched his perfectly tailored black coat. Drops seemed to veer away at the last moment, as if even water recognized what he was. Nathaniel Gray emerged from the shadows of a nearby doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. The old servant had learned to read his master's stillness. Lucian's voice carried the faint accent of a century-long past. The words came out sharper than intended. Lucian forced himself to breathe, though he no longer needed air. Old habits died hard, even after 312 years. Nathaniel's expression shifted to alarm. That's not possible. Not unless she has power. Lucian turned his face toward the north, toward Cambridge, where the cry had originated. His supernatural senses could still feel the faint echo of her terror, like ripples spreading across dark water. The servant's pragmatism was well-founded. Lucian had survived 3 centuries by being cautious, by staying hidden, by never revealing what he truly was to the humans who would destroy him if they knew. Yet the woman's voice still resonated in his mind. The raw desperation in those 3 words, please, someone, help, spoke of genuine terror, not deception. Prepare the carriage, Lucian said. To Cambridge? Lucian's silver eyes gleamed in the lamplight, catching and reflecting it like a predator's. Someone reached across 40 miles in her sleep and found the one creature in England who could hear her. Nathaniel opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. He'd served Lord Blackthorne long enough to recognize that tone. The decision was made. As the old servant hurried away to make preparations, Lucian remained on the empty street. He closed his eyes and reached out with senses that extended far beyond human limitations. There, faint but present, he could still feel her. The nightmare had released its grip, but the curse causing it remained. She was in danger, real danger, the kind that would kill her slowly, night after night, until her mind shattered or her heart simply stopped. He should ignore it, should return to his London townhouse and forget he'd heard anything. Getting involved with humans always ended badly. They aged and died while he remained unchanged. They feared what they didn't understand. They hunted monsters, and Lucian Blackthorne was definitely a monster. But the woman's voice echoed again through his memory. Please, someone. She'd asked for help, and somehow, impossibly, she'd asked him. Lucian opened his eyes and smiled, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. Hold on, he whispered to the darkness. Clara woke to find a man standing in her room. Not standing, looming. His silhouette blocked the window where grey dawn light struggled through the curtains. Her breath caught. Her fingers clutched the bedsheets. Who? The word came out as a whisper. His voice was cultured, precise, like cut glass. I am Lord Lucian Blackthorne. Clara's mind raced. The dream still clung to her thoughts. The whisper, the cold. This stranger knowing her name felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. She sat up slowly. Her hand reached for the candlestick on her nightstand. He moved slightly. The weak light caught his face, pale, angular, impossibly still. Silver eyes watched her without blinking. You should be asking why you cannot remember falling asleep. The candlestick felt heavy in her grip. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Mrs. Hartwell is in the kitchen. Lord Blackthorne tilted his head. The gesture reminded Clara of a bird studying prey. Scream if you wish. But first, tell me, did you dream of water? Clara's throat tightened. She had, every night for a week. Dark water closing over her head. A voice calling her down into the depths. Her voice cracked. He stepped forward. Clara raised the candlestick. He stopped immediately, hands visible at his sides. A curse has been placed upon you. Each dream pulls you closer to death. Clara's arm trembled. The candlestick wavered. You break into my room. You speak of curses like they're real. You teach Professor Hartwell's children. Lord Blackthorne's silver eyes never left hers. You have read enough to know curses exist. You feel it already, don't you? The exhaustion. Clara wanted to deny it. The words died on her tongue. She was tired, so tired. And cold. Yes, always cold now, even wrapped in blankets before the fire. She lowered the candlestick slightly. He moved to the window, drew back the curtain. Clara saw his face clearly now, beautiful in a sharp, inhuman way. Too perfect, too still. Someone has marked you for death. The dreams are the first stage. Clara stood. Her nightgown fell to her ankles. She pulled her shawl tighter. Lord Blackthorne turned from the window. Something flickered across his face. Regret? But I know you are in danger. I know the signs of this particular curse. The room felt smaller suddenly, colder. Clara's breath misted in the air. That wasn't normal. It was September, not winter. The question came out steadier than she felt. Why come here? Lord Blackthorne was silent for a long moment. His silver eyes studied her face. Clara frowned. I never scream. His voice dropped lower, softer, almost gentle. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Mrs. Hartwell's heavy tread on the stairs. Clara glanced toward her door. When she looked back, Lord Blackthorne stood by the window. I will return tonight, he said. Lock your door. Sleep with iron under your pillow. Wait, but he was already gone. The window stood open. Cold morning air rushed in. Clara ran to look out. The garden below was empty, no figure hurrying away. No sign anyone had been there at all, except her hands were still shaking, and the room was still cold. Clara descended the stairs to breakfast with her decision made. She would investigate the curse herself. Lord Blackthorne had offered his help, but accepting it felt dangerous in ways she couldn't name. Professor Edmund Hartwell sat at the dining table surrounded by open books. His grey hair stood in wild tufts, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, almost as dark as Clara's own. He looked up, distracted. Clara poured tea from the silver pot. A lie, but a necessary one. The nightmare had returned the moment she'd fallen back asleep after Lord Blackthorne's departure. This time, she'd felt cold hands around her throat. She'd woken gasping, certain she was drowning. Mrs. Beatrice Hartwell entered with a tray of toast and eggs. The housekeeper's sharp eyes swept over Clara's face. You look pale, dear. I'm quite well, Mrs. The housekeeper sniffed, unconvinced. She set the tray down with more force than necessary. The professor works you too hard. Professor Hartwell spoke mildly, but his attention had already returned to his reading. Miss Ashford, I'll need you in the library this morning. Clara's pulse quickened. Occult texts. He turned a page without looking up. Several volumes on curses and their remedies. Had Lord Blackthorne sent word to him? No, that was impossible. The professor had ordered these books weeks ago, perhaps months. Still, the timing felt like providence. Or a trap. I'll begin cataloguing them immediately after breakfast, Clara said. Mrs. Hartwell poured more tea, her movements stiff with disapproval. Curses and dark magic? The professor finally looked up, his expression gentle but firm. The housekeeper left without another word, her skirts rustling with indignation. Professor Hartwell watched her go, then turned to Clara. She means well. She's been with my family since I was a boy. Clara buttered her toast, though her appetite had fled. May I ask, Professor, have you ever encountered a real curse? The professor set down his teacup carefully, too carefully. He studied her face for a long moment. Yes, Miss Ashford, I have encountered such things. The admission hung in the air between them. Clara asked. A colleague of mine years ago. The professor's voice grew distant. He said, it whispered promises of death. Clara's hands went cold. Professor Hartwell met her eyes. The doctors said his heart simply stopped, but his face... He paused. He looked terrified. The toast turned to ash in Clara's mouth. She set it down, her fingers trembling. The professor leaned forward. If you're experiencing anything unusual, you must tell me. I have some expertise in these matters. Here was the moment. She could confess everything. The nightmares, the whispers, the mark Lord Blackthorne had mentioned. Professor Hartwell was an occult scholar. He might actually help. But something held her back. A stubborn voice that said accepting help meant admitting weakness, admitting fear. I'm quite well, Professor, she said. As I told Mrs. He didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes, but he nodded and returned to his books. Clara finished her breakfast in silence, tasting nothing. When she rose to leave, the professor spoke again. Miss Ashford, the library door was unlocked this morning. Her blood went cold. She'd locked it before retiring. She always locked it. No, sir. The professor frowned. Perhaps Mrs. Hartwell needed something, or perhaps... He paused. Their eyes met. In that moment, Clara knew he suspected the truth. Someone had entered the house while they slept. Someone had been in the library. Someone had been looking for something, or someone. The private dining room felt too small for the man who occupied it. Clara stood in the doorway, her hand still on the brass handle, watching Lord Lucian Blackthorne arrange two chairs at angles that suggested conversation rather than confrontation. The gesture struck her as practiced, deliberate. You came, he said without turning. Clara stepped inside and closed the door. The click echoed in the wood-panelled space. You said you could help me understand the curse. He turned then, and those silver eyes caught the lamplight. She'd thought them merely pale in the dawn shadows of her bedroom. Now she saw they gleamed like polished metal, reflecting light in ways human eyes should not. He gestured to the chair farthest from the door. I've ordered tea. Nothing more. I thought you might be more comfortable if I wasn't... The odd phrasing made her pause halfway to the chair. She filed the observation away with all the others accumulating in her mind. His unnatural stillness, his presence in her locked room, the way he'd known about the curse before she'd told anyone. She remained standing, not just your name. A smile touched his lips, sad and old. Direct. I appreciate that quality, Miss Ashford. Clara gripped the back of the chair. Her fingers pressed white against the velvet. The nightmares are getting worse. Last night, I felt the blade enter my chest. His expression shifted. Something moved behind those strange eyes. Concern, perhaps, or recognition. The curse is progressing faster than I anticipated. Her voice rose despite her intention to stay calm. Tell me what you know. Tell me why you were in my room at dawn. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Clara watched him consider his words, saw the calculation in his face. She'd seen that look before on Professor Hartwell when he decided which truths to share with his students. If I tell you, Lucian said slowly, you may wish I hadn't. Some knowledge changes everything. Clara moved around the chair and sat, her back straight. He sat across from her, movements fluid and precise. Miss Ashford, have you read your employer's research on supernatural entities? Her heart kicked against her ribs. The vampire sections. Yes, Professor Hartwell believes they're folklore with roots in medical conditions. Qui might your destiny. 3 words spoken quietly. They fell into the room like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything Clara thought she knew. But even as she said it, pieces clicked together in her mind. His pallor, his silver eyes, the locked door, his presence at dawn, the most dangerous hour for his kind according to legend. Vampires are myths. He leaned forward slightly. Are your nightmares stories? You've felt the blade, Miss Ashford. Clara's hands trembled in her lap. She pressed them together hard. Here? Something flickered across his face. That would be unwise. The admission came easier than she expected. Lucian studied her for a long moment. Then he reached across the small table between them and picked up a silver teaspoon from the service set. Clara watched as he wrapped his pale fingers around it. The metal began to bend, not slowly, not with effort. It folded like paper, curling into an impossible spiral under pressure that should have required tools and heat. He set it down between them, the twisted silver catching the light. Strength beyond human capacity, he said. Speed you've already witnessed. Senses that let me hear your heartbeat from across the room. It's racing, by the way. Clara stared at the ruined spoon. Her rational mind screamed protests, offered explanations. A trick. Prepared metal. Sleight of hand. But her intuition, the same instinct that had warned her about the curse, whispered a different truth. Her voice came out rough. Why help me? The lamp's golden light pulled across Clara's desk, pushing shadows into the corners of her small study. She bent over Professor Hartwell's notes, comparing symbols from 3 different texts. Her eyes burned from hours of concentration. The clock struck 10. She'd been working since dinner. Lord Blackthorne stood by the window, silent as carved stone. He'd positioned himself there an hour ago, watching the street below. Clara tried to ignore how his stillness unnerved her. Normal people shifted their weight, adjusted their stance. He simply stood, motionless as death. You needn't stay, Clara said, not looking up. His voice came from closer than expected. She startled, pen scratching across the page. When had he moved? I merely dozed off, she said. Clara's hand froze. Lucian turned from the window. The lamplight caught his eyes, making them gleam like polished silver. Her voice rose. Heat flooded her cheeks. You stood in my courtyard all night? He crossed his arms. The curse is accelerating. Clara stood, chair scraping against the floor. Something in his tone made her shiver. She turned back to her desk, willing her hand steady. The symbols blurred before her tired eyes. A sound came from the kitchen, soft, like a footstep on tile. Lucian's head snapped toward the doorway. His entire body tensed, predator still. Clara whispered, Mrs. Hartwell retired hours ago. Perhaps she... Glass shattered in the hallway. Clara gasped, stumbling backward. Lucian moved between her and the door so quickly she barely saw him shift position. The study door burst open. A figure in black rushed through, blade flashing in the lamplight. Clara screamed, the knife sliced toward her throat. Lucian's hand shot out. He caught the attacker's wrist mid-strike, moving faster than Clara's eyes could follow. One moment he stood before her. The next, he held the intruder suspended in the air, feet dangling above the floor. The attacker's hood fell back, revealing a young man with wild eyes and symbols carved into his cheeks, the same symbols from Professor Hartwell's texts. The marked one must die, the man hissed. Lucian's grip tightened. The knife clattered to the floor. Death comes for her. The man's eyes rolled back. His body convulsed once, then went limp. Lucian released him. The intruder crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Clara pressed against the bookshelf, heart hammering. Artim. Lucian knelt, examining the man's neck. Poison capsule in a false tooth. Clara's voice shook. Lucian stood slowly. When he faced her, his expression was carefully blank. I told you. Clara stared at him. The lamplight cast his shadow across the wall, impossibly tall and dark. She thought of his stillness, his silence, The way he seemed to appear and disappear without sound, she whispered. Before he could answer, footsteps pounded up the stairs. Nathaniel Gray burst through the door, pistol drawn. He took in the scene, the dead man, Clara's pale face, Lucian's guilty expression. "My lord," Nathaniel said quietly. Lucian's silver eyes held Clara's. Clara's legs gave out. She sank into her chair, mind racing. The speed, the strength, the way he stood watch all night without tiring. The pieces assembled themselves into an impossible picture. "This is madness," she breathed. "Yes," Lucian agreed. He moved toward her. Clara flinched. He stopped immediately, pain flickering across his features. "I won't hurt you," he said softly. He inclined his head. Clara looked at the dead man on her floor, at the knife that would have opened her throat, at Lord Blackthorne, standing between her and death with inhuman grace. She asked. The lamp flickered. Shadows danced across the walls. Clara met his silver eyes and made her choice. Clara stood in the centre of Lord Blackthorne's study, watching him pour tea with hands that never trembled. The morning light stayed outside, blocked by heavy curtains. Candles flickered instead, casting his face in shifting shadows. "You've been following me for weeks," she said. Her voice stayed steady, despite the fear coiling in her chest. "You appear in my nightmares." Lucian set down the teapot. Clara stepped closer, forcing herself to meet those silver eyes. All of it. He remained perfectly still, too still. She'd noticed it before, but hadn't understood. People breathed. People shifted their weight. People blinked more than once a minute. Lord Blackthorne did none of these things. "The truth will change everything between us," he said quietly. Clara's hands clenched at her sides. A muscle tightened in his jaw. The first real movement she'd seen from him. Discovering that monsters are real, that they walk among you. The words hung in the candlelit air. Clara's mind raced through the evidence she'd gathered. His nocturnal visits, his unnatural stillness, the way he'd appeared and disappeared like smoke. Professor Hartwell's books spread across her desk, filled with folklore she'd dismissed as superstition. "Show me," she whispered. Lucian turned away, his shoulders rigid beneath his black coat. Clara moved to stand before him, blocking his path. He looked down at her. Something ancient moved behind his silver eyes, something that had seen centuries pass while remaining unchanged. The transformation was subtle. No dramatic shift, no monstrous revelation. Instead, he simply stopped pretending to be human. His chest ceased its shallow mimicry of breathing. His skin grew paler, taking on the quality of marble in moonlight. When he opened his mouth, she saw the elongated canines he'd been carefully concealing behind measured words and careful smiles. But it was his eyes that truly changed. The silver brightened, catching the candlelight like a cat's eyes in darkness. They held the weight of 3 centuries, of endless nights, of hunger that never truly died. Clara's scientific mind rebelled. Her knees weakened. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "Vampire," she breathed. The word felt impossible on her tongue. His voice remained gentle despite the monster he'd revealed. "I have walked this earth for over 300 years. I feed on blood to survive. Sunlight would destroy me. Edith." She should run. Every instinct screamed for her to flee this room, this house, this impossible reality. But her stubborn nature held her in place. "The nightmares," she said, forcing her thoughts to order themselves. Lucian took a careful step back, giving her space. "But the curse is powerful. It will require both of us working together. You must trust me, Clara. Trust. Such a simple word for such an impossible ask." Clara studied him in the candlelight. He'd revealed his true nature when he could have continued deceiving her. He'd offered alliance when he could have simply watched her die. Whatever monster he might be, he'd shown her more honesty than Professor Hartwell with his hidden books and veiled warnings. "I'm already dying," she said finally. "Each nightmare takes more from me." She lifted her chin, meeting those inhuman eyes. "If you can help me survive, then I'll trust you." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or hope. "Then we begin tonight," Lucian said. "But Clara, once we start this path, there's no turning back. You'll enter a world most humans never see." Clara released the chair, standing on her own. "The curse made that choice for me." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll teach you. But first, you must rest." He gestured to a velvet sofa near the fireplace. "Sleep here. I'll stand watch." Clara hesitated only a moment. Then exhaustion won over fear, and she lay down. As her eyes drifted closed, she saw him settle into a chair nearby, perfectly still, perfectly watchful. For the first time in weeks, Clara slept without screaming. The stone stairs descended deeper than Clara expected. Each step took them further beneath Professor Hartwell's university, into passages she'd never known existed. The air grew colder with every turn. Lucian walked beside her, his hand hovering near her elbow without touching. His silver eyes scanned the darkness ahead. Behind them, Professor Hartwell's breathing echoed off the damp walls. Clara asked. Her voice bounced strangely in the narrow space. "Since the university's founding," Professor Hartwell said, "most of the faculty don't know it exists. Only those who study certain—" They reached a heavy iron door. Professor Hartwell produced a key from his waistcoat. The lock turned with a grinding sound that made Clara's teeth ache. Beyond the door lay a laboratory unlike any Clara had seen. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with specimens in amber liquid. Medical equipment gleamed under gas lamps. In the centre stood a tall man with grey hair and tired eyes. The man's voice was flat. "Dr. Marcus Vale," Professor Hartwell said. "My former colleague." Clara stepped forward. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Dr. Vale moved to one of the cases. Inside, Clara saw vials of dark liquid. Blood, she realised. David was brilliant. Lucian went very still beside her. That predator stillness that meant danger. Clara asked. Dr. Vale pulled a leather journal from a locked drawer. The binding was worn, the pages yellowed. He was studying blood diseases, trying to find cures for conditions that waste the body away. He collected samples from... He opened the journal. Clara saw her father's handwriting, precise and careful. Diagrams filled the margins. Notes covered every inch of space. "He found something in certain blood samples," Dr. Vale continued. "Something that shouldn't exist. Cells that didn't age, didn't die." Clara's breath caught. She looked at Lucian. His face showed nothing, but his hands had curled into fists. "Vampire blood," she whispered. Dr. Vale turned pages slowly. He just knew it could save lives, cure diseases that kill slowly and painfully. He wanted to understand it. Professor Hartwell moved closer to the journal. His scholarly interest warred with something darker in his expression. Dr. Vale's voice dropped. "They're a secret group, part vampire, part human collaborators. They protect vampire existence by eliminating threats." Clara felt cold spread through her chest. "They made it look like an accident." Dr. Vale closed the journal. His hands shook slightly. "I was supposed to die too. I survived by agreeing to continue the work in secret." Clara's voice came out sharp as broken glass. Dr. Vale met her eyes. "And gathering evidence." Lucian finally spoke. His voice was soft and dangerous. "The conclave wants this research buried. If they know Clara is David's daughter, if they know she's investigating, they'll kill her too," Dr. Vale finished. Clara's hand went to her throat. The mark there pulsed with her heartbeat. A warning. Dr. Vale pulled out another journal. This one was newer, filled with recent notes. "But David's research holds the key." Professor Hartwell reached for the journal. His eyes gleamed with academic hunger. "This could start a war," Lucian said. His silver eyes caught the lamplight. "Between humans who want immortality and vampires who want secrecy." Clara looked at the journals. Her father's life work, the key to her survival, the match that could burn down two worlds. I need to know something, she said to Dr. Vale. Did my father know what he was dealing with? Doctor. Vale was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Toward the end, yes. He figured it out, and he kept working anyway. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Her father had been brave. Foolishly, brilliantly brave. They're watching this place, Lucian said suddenly. His head tilted, listening to something Clara couldn't hear. We need to leave. Above them, Clara heard footsteps, many footsteps, moving with purpose through the university halls. The conclave had found them. The Vampire Council chamber existed beneath London in a place that predated the city above. Stone columns rose into darkness. Torches burned with blue flames that cast no warmth. Clara stood beside Lucian at the chamber's centre, surrounded by ancient faces that watched her with predatory stillness. She had insisted on coming. He had tried to refuse. Now 6 vampires sat in judgment, and Clara understood why Lucian had looked afraid. The voice came from the eldest vampire, a woman whose face resembled carved marble. Her name was Morgana, and she had ruled this council for 8 centuries. Lucian stood perfectly still. Only his hand, hidden at his side, betrayed tension. His fingers curled into a fist. The human has a name, Clara said. Her voice echoed in the vast chamber. Clara Ashford. Morgana's silver eyes fixed on her. The weight of that gaze felt like drowning. Clara forced herself to breathe steadily. She had faced death curses and ancient nightmares. She would not flinch before politicians, even immortal ones. Morgana smiled without warmth. How charming. Clara stepped forward. Lucian's hand shot out to stop her, but she moved beyond his reach. The professor discovered vampire blood could break death curses. Another council member leaned forward. He wore clothes from a different century. Clara met his gaze. Silence filled the chamber. The blue flames flickered. A third vampire spoke, younger but no less dangerous. She has seen this place, learned our secrets. Morgana nodded slowly. Death or erasure? Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Death she understood. But erasure meant something worse. Magic that would strip away her memories, leaving blank spaces where Lucian had been. Lucian moved to stand beside her. His voice carried centuries of authority. I invoke ancient right. Morgana's laugh was cold as winter. You, who broke our most sacred law by revealing yourself? You have no rights here, Lucian. The words hit like physical blows. Clara turned to stare at Lucian. His face remained calm, but she saw the truth in his silver eyes. He had known this would happen. He had known and come anyway. Then judge me, Lucian said. But let her go. Clara grabbed his arm. His skin felt cold beneath her fingers. He looked down at her, and his expression held such tenderness it made her chest ache. I have lived 3 centuries, Clara. She turned back to the council. Her legs trembled, but she kept her voice steady. Morgana raised one elegant eyebrow. Clara pulled the journal from her coat pocket. She had brought it as insurance, though the thought of sharing it made her stomach turn. He has notes on every vampire in London, names, addresses, habits. She opened the journal to show the pages. Lists of names stretched across the paper. Some were crossed out, others had dates beside them, dates when vampires had disappeared. The council members leaned forward. Their faces showed the first real emotion Clara had seen. He's been hunting you, Clara continued, quietly, carefully, taking those he thought wouldn't be missed. Morgana's voice had lost its mocking edge. Why not let the professor continue? Humans have hunted us since the beginning. Clara met her gaze. Because murder is murder. Because Lucian saved my life when he could have let the curse take me. She paused, searching for words that felt too large for her throat. Because the world isn't divided into humans and monsters. The silence stretched. Blue flames danced across stone. Finally, Morgana spoke. Clara lifted her chin. Let me stop the professor. He trusts me, Morgana asked. Clara glanced at Lucian. He watched her with an expression she couldn't read. Then I accept whatever judgment you choose, she said. Morgana smiled. This time, it almost looked genuine. Very well, Clara Ashford, you may live. The curse would claim Clara at dawn. Lucian felt the truth of it in his bones as they raced through London's empty streets. 3 hours remained before sunrise. The ritual requires blood, Clara said beside him in the carriage. Her voice was steady despite the trembling of her hands. My blood and yours. Lucian's jaw tightened. Of course it required his blood. Every dark magic he'd encountered in 3 centuries demanded sacrifice. The question was whether Clara understood what drinking vampire blood might do to her. You haven't asked what the consequences might be, he said carefully. Clara met his silver gaze without flinching. Death is also a consequence. Stubborn woman. It was one of the things he loved about her, though love was a word he hadn't dared speak aloud. Not when his very nature made him a monster. The carriage stopped outside Professor Hartwell's townhouse. Every window blazed with light despite the late hour. Something was wrong. Nathaniel Gray appeared from the shadows, his weathered face grim. My lord, the house has been ransacked. Si quoi? Clara was out of the carriage before Lucian could stop her. She ran up the steps and through the open door. He followed with inhuman speed, catching her arm just as she reached the study. The room looked like a battlefield. Books lay scattered across the floor, their spines broken. Papers covered every surface. The desk had been overturned, and in the centre of the chaos stood Mrs. Beatrice Hartwell, the housekeeper, holding a leather journal against her chest. Miss Ashford, the older woman said. Her voice shook. Thank God you've come. Clara pulled free of Lucian's grip and crossed to her. Professor Hartwell. Mrs. Hartwell's knuckles were white around the journal. They demanded his research on the death curse. When he refused, they dragged him away. Clara took the journal with trembling hands. Lucian watched her face go pale as she opened it. Whatever she saw there drained the colour from her cheeks. It's not just a curse, Clara whispered. It's a binding. Someone tied my life force to another person's death. Lucian moved closer, reading over her shoulder. The professor's handwriting covered the pages in cramped script. Diagrams showed magical symbols Lucian recognized from his darkest years. Yes, Clara's grey eyes lifted to his. Or their blood, willingly given. Professor Hartwell discovered who cast the curse. Lucian's voice came out harsh. His brother. Professor Edmund Hartwell's own brother cast the curse 20 years ago, intending it for someone else. Clara's hands shook harder now. Lucian understood immediately. Family loyalty warring with moral duty. He'd seen that conflict destroy men before. Nathaniel asked from the doorway. Mrs. Hartwell shook her head. I don't know, but they mentioned a name, Blackthorne. Ice flooded Lucian's veins. Not his name. Please, not his name. Someone is using your reputation, Clara said softly. She'd always been too perceptive. Lucian's voice was flat. They want me bound to human law. A clock chimed somewhere in the house. 2 hours until dawn. 2 hours until the curse completed its work and Clara died. Unless they found Professor Hartwell and forced him to reveal his brother's location. Clara straightened her shoulders. The gesture reminded Lucian why he'd fallen for this stubborn, brilliant woman. She faced death itself without flinching. Then we hunt, she said simply. You're the predator, Lord Blackthorne. Lucian smiled, letting his fangs show for the first time in her presence. 6 months had passed since the council's judgment. Spring sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Professor Hartwell's study, warming the Persian rug where Clara stood arranging books. Her hands no longer trembled when she touched ancient texts. The nightmares had ended the moment Lucian's blood broke the curse. She was alive, whole, and forever changed. Professor Edmund Hartwell peered over his spectacles from his desk. Clara set down the leather-bound grimoire. Forgive me, Professor. The old scholar's eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. Heat rose to Clara's cheeks. Lucian visited every evening after sunset, always proper, always respectful of the boundaries she'd set. They walked in the garden. They talked of books and history. He never pressed for more than she offered, but the question hung between them like morning mist, unspoken, unavoidable. Mrs. Beatrice Hartwell bustled into the study with her usual efficiency. "Miss Ashford, Lord Blackthorne has arrived." "Thank you, Mrs." Clara smoothed her dove-grey dress and checked her reflection in the window glass. Her colour had returned. The dark circles beneath her eyes had faded. She looked like herself again, but felt like someone entirely different. Lucian waited by the rose arbour, his dark coat stark against the blooming flowers. He turned as she approached, and his silver eyes caught the fading sunlight. He'd timed his arrival carefully, she realised. The sun no longer burned him during these twilight hours, but it still caused him discomfort. He took her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. The gesture was courtly, old-fashioned. It made her heart flutter every time. "You're early," she said softly. His thumb traced circles on her palm. "There's something I must ask." Clara's breath caught. She'd known this conversation was coming, had dreaded it and longed for it in equal measure. They walked to the garden bench beneath the willow tree. Lucian didn't sit. He paced instead, his usual grace replaced by restless energy. He paused, searching for words. "I've lived 3 centuries, Clara. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've walked through countless springs without truly seeing them." He stopped pacing and faced her directly. "I can offer you decades more of life. Not immortality. I wouldn't curse you with that. But 50, perhaps 60 additional years. Time enough to see the new century dawn." Clara finished gently. His jaw tightened. "I won't age, Clara. That's the cruelty of it. You would change while I remained frozen." She stood and moved closer. The word emerged raw and honest. "My companion. My equal." Clara reached up and touched his face. His skin was cool beneath her fingertips, but not cold. Never cold when he looked at her like this. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said. "About what it means. The gift of extended life comes with a price, doesn't it?" Lucian covered her hand with his own. "You would outlive your friends. Watch the world change in ways that might frighten you. And yes, you would age while I don't." Clara's voice strengthened with conviction. "I would have time to write the books I've dreamed of writing. Time to study the mysteries I've only begun to understand." She smiled at throwing his words back at him. "My whole life, I've been taught to be practical, sensible, to make safe choices. But the curse taught me something, Lucian. Life is precious precisely because it ends." Lucian's silver eyes widened. Clara took both his hands in hers. "Give me the gift. Give me the years. Let me grow old beside you, even if you remain unchanged." For a moment, Lucian stood perfectly still. Then he pulled her into his arms with desperate tenderness, burying his face in her hair. His body shook with emotion he couldn't voice. He whispered against her temple. They stood together as twilight deepened into night. The garden filled with shadows, but Clara felt no fear. She'd walked through darkness and emerged into light. She'd faced death and chosen life. She asked, "Tonight, if you wish." Lucian pulled back to study her face. "But Clara, you must understand, my blood will change you in subtle ways. Your senses will sharpen. You'll feel the pull of night more strongly." Clara's smile was wry. "Perhaps I'll be something better." They walked back to the house hand in hand. Professor Hartwell looked up from his desk as they entered, took one look at their faces, and nodded with satisfaction. "I suppose I'll need a new governess," he said dryly. "The best," Lucian promised. Mrs. Hartwell appeared with a knowing smile. "I've prepared the guest room, my lord. Everything as Mr. Clara's heart hammered as they climbed the stairs. This was her choice, her future, and she was walking toward it with open eyes. The guest room had been transformed. Heavy curtains blocked the windows. Candles provided soft light. A comfortable chair waited beside a small table bearing a silver chalice. Nathaniel Gray stood by the door, his weathered face grave. "Miss Ashford," he bowed to Lucian. The door closed softly. Clara and Lucian were alone. Sit, Lucian said gently, guiding her to the chair. This will feel strange, but it won't hurt. Clara watched as he used a small knife to open a vein in his wrist. Blood-welled, dark and viscous. He let it drip into the chalice, not much, perhaps a few tablespoons, then sealed the wound with preternatural speed. Drink slowly, he instructed, kneeling beside her chair. The chalice was warm in Clara's hands. She raised it to her lips, hesitated for only a heartbeat, then drank. The taste was copper and salt and something else, something ancient. The liquid burned down her throat like strong wine, spreading heat through her chest and limbs. Clara gasped. The room suddenly sharpened into crystal clarity. She could hear Lucian's slow heartbeat, Mrs. Hartwell moving in the hallway below, even the mice in the walls. Colours deepened, scents intensified. Easy, Lucian murmured, steadying her. The changes rippled through her body like waves on a shore. Not transformation, but enhancement. Her human nature remained, but now it was threaded with something more, something that whispered of long years and dark wisdom. When the sensation finally settled, Clara opened her eyes. Lucian watched her with anxious hope. Tihim, ta me mas, she laughed, and the sound was as bright with wonder. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt his relief like a physical thing. They held each other as the candles burned low, two souls bound together across the divide of mortality. Clara asked eventually. Lucian's smile was tender. We travel, if you wish. I'll show you Venice by moonlight, Paris in winter, the Scottish Highlands in autumn. We'll return here between journeys. You'll write your books. I'll continue my work with the council. And we'll have time, Clara. Clara Ashford finally understood what the curse had been trying to teach her. Life wasn't measured in years, but in moments of connection. She'd spent so long being practical and cautious that she'd forgotten how to truly live. Now she knew better. Now she had decades stretching before her, and she would fill them with purpose and passion and love. The future no longer frightened her. She would face it hand in hand with Lucian, growing and changing while he remained her constant. It would be difficult at times. There would be challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But then, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through the gap in the curtains, she glimpsed a figure standing in the garden below, watching the house. The moonlight caught pale features and dark robes, a member of the Vampire Council. And in their hand, something gleamed, a silver medallion marked with an ancient seal. The seal of binding. What she didn't know was that her choice had set other wheels in motion. The council's judgment had been conditional, and by accepting Lucian's blood, she'd triggered an old law, one that would change everything.